Hello and welcome back to the InterDrone podcast, your 30,000 foot view of the commercial drone industry. It is Tuesday, January 12th, 2021, our first episode of the new year. Thrilled to be back bringing you this weekly recording. And we're thrilled to have our special guest on today, Don Zolday, founder, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. She also serves as the InterDrone Adjunct Conference Planner. She helped us organize a number of the great sessions from InterDrone Online just this past December. And if anybody wasn't able to attend, we'll have all that content on demand by the end of this week on our content platform, Launchpad, launchpad.aero. You can head over and set up a free account and catch up on anything you may have missed from the December event. So every week we talk about a couple of news stories from the past week. And this week we're just going to talk about one. We're going to talk about remote ID, the big ruling that came down at the end of last year. I think it was 4 days before the new year. Don wrote a great article on InsideUnmannedSystems.com, which we are going to go through today. We are coming to you live, so please, if you're tuning in, ask us questions, whether you're on Twitch, Facebook, or YouTube. On Twitch, there's a box down below. You can ask your questions on YouTube and Facebook. You can drop your question in the comments, and those will be routed to us, and we'll get those answered in real time. So again, we'll be diving into remote ID, the new ruling, over the next hour. Don, before we get too into the weeds on remote ID, if you could maybe give our listeners a brief background about some of your experience in aviation and the Air Force, and then how you, I guess, made your way into the drone industry and what you do today at P3 Tech Consulting.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, hello everybody and Happy New Year. Welcome to 2021. I'm actually very honored to be your first podcast of the year. I didn't realize that when you asked me to do this. So thank you for that. So my background, I spent almost 25 years in the United States Air Force and the Judge Advocate General Corps, so military attorney. Towards the latter part of my career is when I really got into drones or unmanned aircraft systems, especially when I was at Air Combat Command, because they're the functional manager, for lack of a better term, for the large UAS. And that's where I really got into researching and writing about drone law and policy. And I helped formulate the DoD's, Department of Defense's domestic drone policy at that time, and did another iteration in 2018. After I retired from the military active duty in March of 2018, I spent 2 years with the Secretary of the Air Force's Office of the General Counsel. I did business matters for the United States Air Force Academy. The Academy has a whole host of research centers and institutes, and one of them is an unmanned aircraft center. So I got to still dabble in drone law and policy at that time. And then over the past year, I have been the deputy director for the Air Force Academy's Center for Character and Leadership Development. So transitioned from that attorney role to being administrative faculty and leading in the area of leadership and character development. But in the midst of that, around October of 2019, I created my company, P3 Tech Consulting. And frankly, I did it right on the heels of what I will call a major life-changing event for me, which is when I won Women in Drones Women to Watch award in the category of leadership. And actually that was announced at InterDrone. And so that was one of my great experiences with InterDrone right off the bat. That was the impetus and the inspiration for me to create my company. It's all about connecting people with a passion for advanced technology platforms, with the programs, policies, and plans they need and information they need to succeed. And my vision really is to become the premier global resource for that and to use innovation to make the world a better place. And so that's a little bit about my background and what I do in P3 Tech and why I created it.
Yeah, thanks for all the kind words, Dawn, and you deserve some kind ones in return. Thank you so much for being our adjunct conference producer this year. I think you brought a level of polish, and especially the international voices And the voices of women you brought to the program were definitely key to, I think, the feel of the show. So thanks again for joining us to talk about the important topic of probably the future of drones in general, remote ID today. We've got, I think, 20 live viewers on, 31 live viewers on Twitch. So hopefully we'll have some questions from them that you can ask at any time. So please do.
Yeah. So let's dive right in. I think, as I mentioned, 4 days before the new year, and after 53 public comments on the draft rule, the FAA finally released its final remote ID rule, essentially requiring a digital license plate for unmanned aircraft to be operated in the U.S., one that both people on the ground and other airspace users can receive. So the rule is specifically for unmanned aerial vehicles itself, and not UAS. So not the entire unmanned system, which includes the control station and data link. This recognizes that manufacturers might make UAs that are controlled by another manufacturer's control stations. More importantly, it ensures that the UA will be broadcasting remote ID and not the control station. So, before we even get any further, let's stop right here. Don, I'd love to get some of your insight. What do you think about putting the broadcast requirement on the vehicles itself and not the entire system? Is that going to allow for more kind of flexibility going forward? Can you just kind of compare and contrast those two ideas and maybe try to put yourself in the shoes of some of the regulators at the FAA and why they went this route?
Yeah, so let's back up a second, and because CJ, I think you meant to say 50,000 comments were received on this rule, and it took the FAA about a year to complete the final rule. And frankly, from the original iteration in the Notice of Public Rulemaking that came out in December of 2019 until this December 28th launch of the final rule. And by the way, I got to squirrel for a second. It has not been published in the Federal Register, right? So we're calling it the final rule, but it really becomes official when that happens, and it is with the Federal Register folks, but it hasn't been officially published yet, and that's key to understanding when those various timelines, I'm sure we'll talk about later, when they start kicking in. But it took them about a year to put all this together, and from the original notice to what we have today, a lot of different things changed. And CJ, you pinged right on the first one, which is, words matter. And so some terminology was clarified. This idea that, remote ID is about the unmanned aircraft itself and not about the entire system. Mm-hmm. It's a nuance, but it's an important one, and one the FAA made a very strong point in making throughout the entire rule. So the point is that the remote ID, it needs to be tied to the aircraft because it's all about the location of the aircraft. It's a license plate for that aircraft. Now, is there a tie to the system and the controller as a location? Absolutely. But the beacon, if you will, where this is, I'll use my technical term, where this is being beamed from is going to be from the actual aircraft as opposed to someone on the ground holding a controller. And so hence the kind of the nuance in the terminology to be consistent with how this is going to work and the technology that's going to be employed.
What are the consequences of the way that the terminology as it's laid out, and is that a shift from where it was or where people thought it was heading, kind of the months leading into what is the final rule according to the FAA before it's placed on the register?
I don't think that was really a shift to where the technology was going to be located. I think it was always going to be located on the actual aircraft. The biggest difference, other than clarifying that terminology and making that just, beat you over the head obvious if that's what they were saying, the biggest change was not using network. as part of the solution, right? So that was the one where everybody got this rule and they said, whoa, this is somewhat of a radical shift, because, if you all recall, they had kind of set up the world in this notice of public rulemaking to have, three different, I'll call them kinds of drones, right, with remote ID. One was the standard remote ID, and then the other was the which would require a broadcast and network, kind of beaming solution, right? And then the limited remote ID was only going to be network based. And then the without remote ID, those drones that did not have it would be relegated to flying in a federally recognized identification area, or FRIA. The first and those bookends, the standard and the FRIA aspects, they haven't changed a lot. There are definitely nuances we could go through. But the most radical change was that one in the middle. So the standard remote ID drone, it's gone, because this is a broadcast only solution. Standard remote ID will not have a network component to it. There's no more limited remote ID. Instead, there's going to be these things called broadcast modules that will allow you to retrofit an existing aircraft to broadcast the remote ID message elements. And then the FRIA, the folks without remote ID, which are going to mostly maybe your research folks, your hobbyists and things like that, they will be flying out of a federally recognized identification area.
Right.
So what does that mean for end users then? So you mentioned the word retrofitting. I'd imagine some drones can't be retrofitted with the broadcast technology. Does that mean they're just grounded to or they have to fly in a FRIA zone?
Well, here's the thing, Mike. Let's just be clear. I'm not an engineer, right? So, and the technology for these modules doesn't quite exist. So, what I will tell you is Kenji Sugihara, who is now the CEO of the Drones Service Providers Alliance, DSPA, working with Vic Moss. Kenji just got a patent on broadcast ID. And so, what you'll see is, this rule has come out, but there's a lot of things that need to fall into place to actually effectuate it. And one of those is the technology for the broadcast module. Not only, the patents like Kenji just got and what others I'm sure will follow, but what the physical technology, off the manufacturing, assembly lines, what is that going to look like? When we talk about retrofit, I think the vision is literally you slap it on, an aircraft. So is it possible that, I would think whoever's going to manufacture these things are going to try to make them compatible with as many possible existing aircrafts, as a solution. So that it's a viable business, model. Mm-hmm. But that remains to be seen.
Yeah. So from the manufacturing side, I think they'll probably work things out, right? It's the
Yep.
main manufacturers. It really kind of, how much does this become a hassle for people who've currently invested? If they've invested in drones that are over $1,000, that's a bigger hit to the wallet to have them to reinvest in that. And then they have to weigh that against retrofitting. But we knew that was going to come. That's not really nearly that much of a surprise. But yeah, I think we'll dive more into the networking solutions being off the table. It's not entirely off the table though, right? It's something that they left room to come later. But what does that mean? Does that still put some people on the chopping block if you've invested in inter-USS platforms?
So you raise another great point that I think dovetails with CJ's earlier point about these nuances and words mattering, because if you read the rule, the rule, and when I say the rule, right, the actual rule, I think it's like 30 or some odd pages out of the almost 500 that were released. The large bulk of the document that was put out into the public is really that explanatory, going through the comments that's required under the Administrative Procedures Act. This group said this, we chose not to go this direction because of this. So the actual rule itself is not really that long. But if you dig through the entirety of the document, you'll see a lot of nuggets in there that kind of forecast this idea that network is not off the table. Words like, law enforcement says, quote unquote, at this time, a broadcast solution, is workable for them. Words like, and again, this is just from memory, that we envision a potential, USS-like, paradigm or concept, and we encourage industry to keep innovating for unmanned traffic management. And so, and when you look at UTM ConUps 2.0 and you put these things together, it's clear that network isn't off the table. It's just it almost seemed like at this time, and to get this done as promised, it was just too hard to do to figure out that network piece of it fully. But network is still alive and well, in my humble opinion. And in fact, Miriam McNabb, dronelife.com, they just pushed out an article about Apple just received a patent, incredibly, on New Year's Eve, December 31st. So 2 days after the rule came out, and it's for this essentially a network solution, that will allow the transfer, a handoff from cell tower to cell tower a lot more rapidly and seamlessly. That when you think about that, is that, that could really open up beyond visual line of sight, unmanned traffic management, and where is Apple fitting into all this? So, so what I would say, if you're talking about winners, losers from the rule, USS, unmanned aircraft service suppliers, are they losing out here? I'd say no, because I think they're moving forward. They're in the background. They are going to come forward, I would say probably sooner versus later, to be honest with you.
I want to, just in case anyone, because we're referring to a network versus broadcasting. So just to clear that up, because we keep using these terms. So broadcasting, it means that the actual aircraft itself is sending a signal to a receiver, basically via radio, as opposed to a network-based solution, which would be one broadband internet-based network that all these drones communicate on, and that regulators, law enforcement can get that information from the network, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the broadcast versus network. That's exactly right.
And what are some of the benefits of each and potential cons of each? I know Wing made a pretty opinionated statement on that they wished the FAA would have come down with a more network-based solution as opposed to this broadcast. But at a high level, what are some of the pros and cons, and could you compare and contrast the two potential solutions a little bit?
Well, so your broadcast is going to be Bluetooth and kind of wireless based, your network, internet based. And, honestly, CJ, it's really hard to say which one is better. I can tell you is, even for the broadcast solution that has been put forward, that specific spectrum, radio frequency spectrum, RF spectrum, has not been allocated for this.
Right.
And so, once again, in concept, how is this going to work? Right. I think that is the big question. I mean, that's what I put at the end of the article, from Inside Unmanned that you referenced earlier, which is, we've got 500 pages, a lot of information, but at the end of the day, how is this actually going to work? And so it's not just the spectrum that needs to be, figured out. Like, even things like those FRIAs we talked about, and the criteria, and now educational institutions can apply that. That's a new add. I think there was mention, we'll put that out in an advisory circular later, how that's going to work. Right. And so, we talked about technology, the fact that people are just now getting patents for some of these things. The technology doesn't exist. I'll be curious to hear what Charles Werner and his drone responders group talk about tomorrow with the FAA. From the law enforcement community standpoint, just think about it. If you do a word search on law enforcement in that rule, you're going to get like 91 plus hits. And, when you look at the rationale for the rule, it's safety, but it's primarily security, and this idea that law enforcement and security agencies need to be able to track unmanned aircraft, need to be able to identify them, detect them. And yet it says, but they're not required to use it. And so it's out there and they'll have to pay for it. So, do they have existing equipment that can, capture the broadcast signals that we're talking about? Perhaps maybe that's why they went with the broadcast option, because maybe they have that on hand, but I can also tell you it's not linked into any of the normal law enforcement databases, which is probably, if I was a cop and I'm approaching somebody from my own safety standpoint, I'd want to be able to, especially if someone I think is doing something incorrect, wrong or dangerous or criminal, I'd want to be able to, like when I roll up on a car, plug that into my system, be able to see if they have outstanding warrants. Do they have a history of violence? Law enforcement doesn't have that ability even with this new rule. And so I guess what I'm saying is there's so many things to continue to be developed to really make this effective for the purpose for which it was written.
Right. So before we move on, I want to kind of capture a few questions here. I don't know if you could answer this one, but from Mark, noob question: How much weight are we talking to implement this for retrofit? Is there a transmitter strength or transmission interval requirement? So, I think the weight point is an interesting issue because this affects battery life. So then you might just have to buy a new drone anyway, if you can only fly for 5-7 minutes with the weight of this transmitter.
That's absolutely a great point. So we don't know what these transmitters are going to look like, how much they're going to weigh. The rule applies to 50.55 and greater. And so where the weight becomes super relevant actually is for ops over people and at night, which was a rule that was released simultaneously with this rule, because they created this kind of category scenario of 4 different categories. And because it's risk-based, weight plays into what category, your aircraft would fall into and the different requirements that would apply. I mean, we can get into that. I did another article with General Pass for Insight Unmanned on the ops over people rule as well. There was a second part, though, besides weight that you mentioned, Mike. What was that second component?
Yeah, is there a transmitter strength or transmission interval requirement, which, again, is also important? Like, how often do they need to be saying, I'm here, I'm here?
Yes, there was. And let me see if I have that in my article. I don't honestly remember that from just by memory, but there definitely was an interval requirement for broadcasting those message elements. Give me a second.
I mean, it was only 499 pages, right? So
yeah. Sorry, I didn't memorize every word, but I will.
Well, we have the Discord, so I recommend if that person's not in the Discord, you can just go there later. Maybe Dawn could drop the answers in. Do you think you could do that, Dawn, or do you want to direct them to your website, maybe?
That kills me because option B is go into the rule and do a search for interval. Oh, you know what? I think maybe
Scott answered here, minimum 1 hertz.
Yeah. So. Okay. Thank you, Scott. That was the number one was in my brain, but I didn't want to say the wrong thing. But now that you say that, I know that is correct.
So here's an interesting one. J Dice 77. Why are we reinventing the wheel? We already have ADS-B for GA. So.
Oh boy. Okay. There is a very lengthy discussion on ADS-B out in the rule. I'd really encourage you, kind of go to the primary source, read it yourself. But I'll just paraphrase. My understanding was this idea of just clutter. They didn't want too many folks on that net all at one time. And so, again, that's my rudimentary understanding, but the FAA went at great lengths to explain their rationale as to why they did not include ADS-B out as part of this rule. By the way, that did not change from the notice. Right from the start, over a year ago, the FAA said, we're not going to use ADS-B out as our solution. And so that is one of the things that did not change actually from the original rule to that final rule.
So, Zoom Room TV, this rule takes effect in 2 years with a new administration, new people heading the FAA. How much would this rule be changing before it goes live? Could it be scrapped totally and redone? I also understand there's to be a lawsuit to look at privacy issues. So spilling the beans too early there on the lawsuit.
It's great question though. I was going to ask something similar just because the timeline is so long, and like you pointed out in your article, Don, it almost leaves just as many questions or brings up just as many new questions as it actually answered. What are the possibilities of them kind of tweaking this along the way? 30 months is a long time in this industry, as we know.
Yeah, I think 30 months is a long time, but CJ, to use your word, I think tweaking the rule is more likely than, to use Mike's word, scrapping it. Right. Well, no, because look, so many people put so much time and effort into this. Let's give the FAA some credit here. They really did go through 53,000 comments. They looked at this critically. The broadcast option, that in itself is not new. That was part of the standard ID in the original notice. What changed was that network piece of it. So, with the new administration, are they going to radically change everything in the UAS world? I would think not. And look, I've been in the national security arena for almost 30 years now. And what I will say is, it's almost like from administration to administration, the major policies, they don't change radically. There's, they might go a little right, they might go a little left, but, I'll give props to, the Federal Civil Service Corps. There's a whole bunch of bureaucrats in the federal government for a reason, to keep the ship moving forward despite whoever is in charge. And so at its core, no one is really disputing the need for remote ID in the United States or globally. Like, it's an important concept. Now how you execute that concept, I think, is what we need to talk about, right? But this idea that we need to have, situational awareness of what is flying around in the air, that we need to be able to detect nefarious users and things of that nature, or even the clueless and careless. I don't think anybody really disputes that. And so, if I'm looking into my crystal ball, into the next 4 years, I'd say keep tweaking it. I mean, even when you look in the R&D world, right? So the Obama administration, they put together the FAA test sites. And by the way, Congress drove that, right? Congress directed that, all right? And then the next thing you saw was the IPPs. That was a Trump era R&D initiative.
It was an evolution on top of it. Yeah.
On top of it.
Yeah.
So they didn't say we're killing all test sites, we're doing this instead. In a way, they grew it. And, because I'm a nerd, I researched all this. It was really odd. Like, the president put out an executive order saying, go do these IPPs. And then Congress came out later in the FAA Reauthorization Act, I think it was 2018, and said, yes, do these IPPs. So it was almost like they blessed it. Like, oh, by the way, that was like our lane to say that. So we're okay with it, but we're gonna say it. Whereas with the Obama administration, it was I think it was 2016 or the 2012 Act, and then they created those. So I think the test sites in the R&D area, IPPs, and now beyond, which is the next phase of IPP, I think that whole situation, that whole paradigm goes to show that we don't just scrap stuff. We build on what's already there, we tweak it, we make it better, we possibly even grow it. And so drones are critical to our economy, our national security. And I think they're going to be an important issue for this administration. I don't think you're going to see radical changes. That's, again, maybe I'll regret saying that, but, I think, we're going to move forward. There's going to be around the margins some changes made, but what we already have in our ecosystem, whether it's the R&D stuff, remote ID, whatever it is, it's going to keep moving forward. It needs to.
Yeah, I certainly don't think the players who have their hands on the wheel are not looking at drones. I mean, it's Buttigieg's DOT now, and he's got a foot in the valley. He's got a lot of friends there, so I would expect he would be probably just pro-tech in general. I think the riddle of China will continue. That seems to be a kind of bipartisan concern. How they exactly address it, I think, will be the most interesting kind of thing to come out of this next administration. But like you said, and it seems like the FAA, if anything, the concern would be less about them building something and it being too rigid, is that they left it kind of very open this time for interpretation to build upon, as we saw with the kind of network or their answer to the network solution there. Like, they took it off the table to reduce complication, but they also did not take it off the table as permanently so that nobody could come back to it and address it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we always said in the Air Force, but totally applicable here. Flexibility is the key to air power. And, that's what you see in this rule. A lot of things to be finalized, but, a lot of flexibility in what that's going to look like.
Yeah. I want to read this this quote from Wing, who was a little bit critical of the using broadcast technology as opposed to a network-based solution. So the use of broadcast remote ID technology raises significant privacy concerns for American citizens, Wing says. Unlike traditional aircraft flying in between known airports, commercial drones fly closer to communities and between businesses and homes. While an observer tracking an airplane can't infer much about the individuals or cargo on board, an observer tracking a drone can infer sensitive information about specific users, including where they visit, spend time, and live, and where customers receive packages from and when. American communities would not accept this type of surveillance of their deliveries or taxi trips on the road. They should not accept it in the sky. Either of you guys, just love to get some of your thoughts on that. I mean, are these concerns valid? It seems like the FAA would have some of this in mind, and so this, not anybody would just be able to figure out where I live and who is flying every drone and get some of the sensitive information. How valid are these concerns, or how much is Wing favor a network-based solution? Because at the end of the day, Google's in the internet business.
Yeah. Okay. So let's back up and talk about these message elements that are being beamed out, right, through this broadcast solution. What it's going to include for the public is the UIS, the UA's identity, so the drone's identity, so manufacturer serial number, or possibly a session ID, which will be a little more vague, and again, more policy to follow. The controls for the standard ID, control station latitude and longitude. For the broadcast modules, it would be the takeoff location. The UAS, let's see, what else? Am I looking? Oh yeah, I'm looking at the wrong one. Hold on. I know this is all right. The added velocity and things like that. But so let me just say this. The personally identifiable information that would be tied to your registration application or in the FAA database that is not available to the public.
Right.
So that is something that law enforcement and security agencies should be able to triangulate, again, with technology to be determined. However, people raise this issue of, oh, well, they don't need a warrant. Look, they can do whatever they want just because it's in there. Well, no. I give props to the FAA here because a couple times in the rule, they outright say that we assume that law enforcement will follow the Constitution. Okay. That's an add from the notice when that was not mentioned.
Wow.
So just to kind of squash those concerns about, privacy on that end, that language was included in the rule. Now, on the public side, can they figure out, can a really savvy person track a drone to your front doorstep to see what Amazon is delivering?
I mean, you could get the equipment. I mean, it's a matter of how much effort you want to put into it, right?
I
mean, it might be easier to just hack it.
To follow your car.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Couldn't they?
Yeah, no different than a DT at that point.
Right.
Right. The level of like.
Yeah. Now, this idea of a persistent surveillance state, to the extent that someone can factually tie that to what this rule does, and I'm honestly, I haven't dug deeply at least at this point into the privacy angle like I did last year with the notice. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I will tell you that there is a Supreme Court case several years back called, the Jones case, and it was about a GPS tracker that law enforcement slapped onto this guy's car, and followed all of his movements. And there was some, language in that case that talked about, I think, by the way, the court struck down that search as being unlawful, but they did it on a very nuanced property trespass basis, which is just kind of weird. But they threw out this idea that persistent surveillance in the right case with the right technology could raise additional concerns. And so the question is, are we there yet? Are we there with this rule? And I'm looking forward to seeing that lawsuit, if that's what someone's alleging. I've talked to a couple people who might have an interest, and I don't know that they're there, but if someone in the audience is aware of a lawsuit, I'd love to see it. I'd love to talk to the person that's behind it. So I'm personally not quite there yet, but also at the same time, I haven't dug super deep into it with regards to being able to track an Amazon package right to your door.
Right.
Yeah, we'll probably have to ask our friends over there to see what the thinking there was. I think they had to come up with a response to remote ID. So I would say at minimum we could say that Wing is not totally satisfied with the outcome of it as is.
Right. Well, and the concerns they voiced, are those truly specific to a broadcast solution and not a network solution? Like, it would seem to me that if somebody hacked a network solution, they would be able to get all that same data. Maybe
Depends
it's
on what
easier
level, where it's encrypted, how it's encrypted, and like Dawn said, like that's not necessarily worked out yet. So I mean,
Right.
You can't claim that it's more secure than something that doesn't exist.
Something that doesn't exist, sure.
So here's a good question. So I'd like to know the procedure from law enforcement officials to interrupt a flight or pilot in operation when they're compliant. So,
Good question.
Yeah. Okay.
Safety concerns there to interrupt the operator, right?
I love that question because it's like that loaded question. So how many times do you beat your wife? It's just like assumes that that's going to happen, and I know sometimes it does, right? And I think that's an education piece on the law enforcement side, and we can talk about that all day long. But if I think it's unfortunate, and I think there's efforts going forward. Like the FAA has a great website and program to educate law enforcement on these rules. It's a matter of resourcing. I know drone responders is out there, kind of beating the bushes. I know Skydio just put out some ethical considerations that's relevant to law enforcement, other things. So what are the procedures for them to interrupt, a pilot? Are there procedures? The tricky thing is that, if you're flying an aircraft, right, you're part of that air crew. But if law enforcement needs to ask you a question, they need to ask you a question, and it's a delicate balance. But, can they force you to land to have a conversation? All these things. I think some of these things happen. But when you look at the Aircraft Sabotage Act, 18 United States Code, Section 32, it talks about interfering, with an air crew and things like that, makes it punishable. But there's got to be like an intent, and I think law enforcement, they have to do their jobs. And so there may be times where they come up to somebody that's controlling an aircraft to ask them a question. The new rule, by the way, is very clear about law enforcement's ability to say, I want to see your registration, and for foreign registered aircraft, there's a certificate that they need to have on their person. It specifically says law enforcement can ask for that. So they need to be able to ask for information. Should they be, touching people, things? No, of course not. Should they, that's a really loaded question. That's a tough one. I think that really requires a lot of education. But if you look at the FAA's LEAP program, they actually have a little pocket card for law enforcement to collect information and things like that. But whoever asked the question, what I will tell you is this: local law enforcement, they don't have the ability to actually enforce FAA regulations. So right. That's federal. We're talking state and local. So this is the biggest rub, I think, with security and remote ID is what tools have we given to law enforcement? Like literally, because we still need technology, right? We know that. But and education and training, we still know they need that. But from an enforcement standpoint, what have we given them? Because, they are basically relegated to enforcing whatever state laws are on the books, and a lot of them have nothing to do with drones. So is it, careless,
by design,
reckless
right?
endangerment? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
No, well, by design, they don't have anything to do with aircraft.
Exactly.
That's the FAA's domain. Mm-hmm. So
exactly. And so, they're supposed to be calling up the FAA regional office and getting somebody out there. Is any of this happening? I think not really. And we know this because the only cases you really hear about are those really kind of high visibility explosive cases where someone's, crashing into a helicopter, or something like that. The everyday person that's operating a drone, Part 107 or recreation, and that interaction, boots on the ground with law enforcement, there's a lot of refinement needed there in many respects. So great point for whoever asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody was calling back to an earlier question. OP specifically asked while flying over his own property if that changed the answer. Is that in? Maybe the chat could fill us in. Was that in reference to the ADS-B thing? Anyway, so this cute comment, I like this one. It's federal until you land.
Right. So stay up in the
air. That is a great point. I want to go back to the wing and this idea of the deliveries on the doorstep. And now that I think about it more, because this is live and somewhat on the fly, I didn't really put a lot of neurons against this. Part of what you can track is not just the velocity, but it's like the location. And so I guess if you're within Bluetooth or Wi-Fi range and you kind of track this thing, could you track it to somebody's doorstep? I'm going to say yes. And, I never really thought about that. So Whoever raised it, thank you. And I think it goes to the broader question of why does the public need to have it? So
Yeah.
I was wondering that too.
Oh, I remember talking at New Era, and Andy and I were going over that because that was my immediate question, and it was like a bone to the public for concerns about privacy, their own privacy with drones.
I can see that.
And it felt like like trying to answer one question with a completely different kind of that they gave them the answer to a completely different question that they weren't actually asking about. Like the type of person that's actually concerned about drone privacy probably just needs to be educated about what drones actually do, what type of person is actually flying them,
They're not
and that
the person
other
who's
laws
gonna be-
already cover their privacy if somebody's doing peeping Tom stuff, or
Oh yeah, and
or
the FAA made a
espionage.
great point to talk about the whole peeping Tom thing, and that this is not the privacy regulating, essentially privacy torts. That's the
Right.
lawyer word for actions that would be maybe compensable in civil court, maybe criminally, chargeable. That they said that's not our lane, but look, we're calling this thing an electronic license plate. That's great. Joe Q public, yes, they should be able to see what the ID number is. Because if the point is this thing is causing me problems and I want to report it, what do they need to know? They need to know the license plate, just like they would for a car. They don't need the other information.
Mhm.
They don't need to know the velocity. Now, okay, again, there's so much to think
Do
about.
they need to know the criminal record of every driver? Or
Well,
or the efficiency, like how many accidents has that car been in? These are
Well, remote ID doesn't open that door for them. What it does is give them some like directional data, where it launched from and things like that. But why do they need that? Like why, if they report it to law enforcement needs that.
Right. Like I'm going to grandma's house. Now everybody needs to know I'm going to grandma's house because of my trajectory or where. Yeah. There's. If you think about cars on the road, it does seem kind of absurd.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Look, as a layperson, I might be able to say that car is going southeast on this road and maybe operating at about the speed I would guess. But I don't know the actual speed of the car. I don't know exactly the direction of every place it's going to go unless I physically follow it. And who does that? Nobody does.
Mhm.
So, when we talk about the new administration or what's the future and what can we do to refine, I think this is a really important thing that needs to be looked at from the standpoint of what information is available to public. It's not only the wings of the world saying, oh, look, it's a privacy issue, track stuff to a door. It's the drone operators, it's the commercial providers that are saying, I don't need, some angry person that doesn't like what I'm doing for whatever reason to be able to physically confront me and find me.
Right.
And I think that's a legitimate concern. I have friends that have been threatened with guns that were just merely doing their paid, Part 107 job. And that is really frightening.
Yeah, and drones as an issue, they take on this mythical kind of space in a conspiracy theorist's mind where, you're a symbol of something that they really hate about the world. And that's just not the type of individual a pilot who's gone through the process of getting commercially certified deserves to be, at risk of. I think we know where my stance on this is now. Well, I don't want to lose the questions because they're actually moving fast.
Yeah. Okay.
So
and I'm having a hard time seeing them, so I appreciate you reading those to me.
Yeah, I mean, you could try pinning mine rather than seeing. So just use the thing. So I'm concerned with bottom line costs when operations are less efficient. When every time we are interrupted just because they're curious. So basically, I'll finish the question. I see this being a big problem in small towns now that they are given tracking. I mean, my take would be that if it's a small town, they probably should know you're consistently operating. But I do see the issue there where it's just like now this is a new thing. You know, kind of like when they find a good spot to hit you with the radar, they just prop up there. You know, like okay, we could hit the drone operators up. I guess that goes back to the enforcement thing too, though. Like, how much enforcement do they actually have? And why would they be so curious?
Well, and do they need a reason to potentially stop a flight, right? Like, just like a police officer needs to show you their radar gun that they caught you speeding with, or they have to give you some sort of reason. They don't just kind of pull you over and shake you down, or they're not supposed to for no reason. And hopefully that's the same as drones. They have some sort of broadcast based piece of data, which they were able to identify a potential bad actor and then are going to look into it further.
Well, you know, one thing to consider for those that have businesses out there, just as a best practice, why not reach out to the local law enforcement when you know you're going to be in an area and just let them know, like, hey, you know what? I've got this job. I'm going to be at this power line or whatever it is, you know, between here and here, you know, just letting you know. I mean, and if there's not like a good communication, maybe, you know, at the local level, the municipal level, you know, get with others, you know, that's the Drone Service Providers Alliance might be good for. Get with others, establish that communication line with law enforcement. So maybe you can put together some kind of an informal or even a formal mechanism to let the law enforcement at least know that this is what I'm doing. And if you're in a neighborhood, why not let the neighbors know? Like, how can that you know, like just again, there's practical ways to do this. But sometimes information, education, transparency, and we do hear a lot about the horror stories, but you know, there's really good news stories. And I hope people out there that fly drones, they have people coming up to them because they think it's cool and they think it's great that they're doing it and they want to know more. I hope those stories are equal, if not greater than the you know, than the converse.
You know,
in
it's
reality.
it's all a matter of an exposure. We're really, I mean, sadly, we're not at the level of exposure that we would want. Because if you think about when cars or even bicycles first hit the roads, people were concerned about them. You know, different lobbies went out, and now we have, you know, we're a car nation. So nobody would think about cars in a negative light. I mean, they might like electric over gasoline, but you know, they're not concerned that they're interrupting their safety, which, I mean, cars are really dangerous and they do. So I think we're just not at that level of understanding where the average person in the public is actually positive. And I think that's what's concerning the majority of the pilots is interfacing with somebody, as I think Scott said, you know, having a shotgun pointed at you is not exactly...
Yeah.
And you know that we're from New York, so we don't think in those terms the same way. But this is true. You know, certain states are more open to open carry. Right. Gun culture is different, and the way you conduct yourself in those states has to assume that a person might be armed. So,
yeah, let me throw this out there too, just as a practical thing to think about. You know, to think about as a business. You know, some of these folks that are doing the drone delivery, you know, and you've probably seen them on, you know, in the media, they have pretty robust operations centers. You know, they have a roped off area. It says, you know, active, you know, flight operations. You certainly don't have to go to that extent, but maybe there's, you know, some signage. Maybe there's like, you can rope off a little, you know, kind of area around you and make it clear that, like, what I'm doing is official. What I'm doing is flying an aircraft, and this is an aircraft operation. You know, you would hope people would respect that. And hey, at least if law enforcement comes up to you, they at least have that initial data point that, you know, especially if it looks legit. You know, I wouldn't do it in crayon, you know, with bungee cords. You know, but there, I just gave someone a great business idea. Start selling these kind of drone zone kits.
Drone zones, yeah.
Well, heck, I should have just kept that for myself.
Yeah,
but,
well,
you know,
John at Data Arrow is saying that he has a sandwich sign he puts out.
Yeah, he said exactly what you just said.
So,
He
reading
notifies
their
his neighbors on either side of him before he flies missions.
Yeah.
Being proactive about it.
Yeah, communication is so key. I mean, even if you're looking at the other side from like law enforcement, I've seen some police departments, they've set up a Facebook page just for the drone where it says, I'm
Right.
here, I'm going to be flying for this reason. So this way the public can be informed about how law enforcement is using this tool in their neighborhoods. Yeah,
Right.
so it seems like both Chris and John from Texas and Arizona, respectively, are saying that people carrying in their state is a concern. So when they fly their drone missions.
There's another question, Don, about night flight. So with the new remote ID ruling, is a waiver still required to fly at night and over people?
No, so that's the kind of the whole point of the rule is to get rid of the waiver and instead, comply with the new requirements. And there are a lot of them. So Micah and CJ, I don't know if you were able to drop my Ops Over People article into the chat as well, or you can get that out to folks.
Drop it in the Discord too, CJ.
Yeah,
this will go away eventually.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. But that's kind of the whole point of the rule, was to get rid of having to do the one-off eaches on night ops and over people. And there's a lot of nuances to it. So I'd ask that you check out my article. And look, I'll be the first person to say, because I'm a huge advocate, go to the primary source. If you want to know, read the rule yourself. You don't look, the law belongs to everybody. You don't have to go to law school to read laws and understand them. General Poss and I, tried to make it more user friendly for you, in our article. So I would definitely go to that. But yeah, waivers will not be required. There's timelines for now. Yes, you still use waivers. There's a point where no, you won't be using waivers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any more?
A couple more.
Okay. We need a timeline for BV loss.
BV loss, yeah.
Yeah, BV loss. I totally forgot it existed.
I saw it. Congress just reached out to the FAA and said, hey, we need some sort of framework or timeline for a BV loss.
I saw some traffic on that. Honestly, it was supposed to be in the Omnibus Appropriations Act. That's like a 5,000 page document. And I've been going through that as well. I could not find that reference to BV loss. And I'm obviously going to go back and relook, but it was more like, one of these, it's the sense of Congress that it would be really great to do this. So it wasn't like, FAA, you will be doing this by X day. It was more like, hey, props for BV loss. Let's make that happen at some point. We think that's an awesome thing. Right. And it was really, I think, geared towards detect and avoid technologies. So yeah, my New Year's wish would be that by the end of this year, we have a BV loss notice of public rulemaking out. Wouldn't that be spectacular? More holiday reading, and maybe a 2022 launch of that. But we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it was less than holiday. Mid-year.
Oh, I agree.
Be nice.
I think the challenge right now is kind of what you already see with remote ID is the technology. It's being developed, and there definitely is technology. I think iris automation is a great example of detect and avoid. That has come a long way, but those use cases, the safety cases that are being built, that's exactly what the Beyond program is about. It's really focused on BV loss. And so I do strongly feel like over the next year, that those use cases and safety cases will continue to grow and build, and the data that people need to say, okay, we can breathe a little easier now. We can see where this could work. And then, frankly, that network solution, because I don't, again, caveat, not the engineer here, but my engineer buddies tell me that the broadcast option will not get you BV loss because it's not going to extend out far enough.
Yeah, there's also the issue with the broadcast option is it's kind of dumb and simple, so you can't build software on top of it to then make new utilities. You can't compute the data and then make new kind of tools from that. So
Well, one of the knocks on the network based, and I think this was in your article, Don, is that in some rural areas you may not have strong enough Wi-Fi or internet signal to hop on the network and give the information you need to be giving from your aircraft.
Infrastructure spending. Let's go for it.
Yeah, infrastructure spending, and I think that is a priority for the FCC.
Yeah.
I apologize, I don't remember the name of the exact initiative, but there is a specific targeted initiative to expand, that coverage into rural areas. That is a priority.
Quick question to kind of close things out. Maybe you answered this, but I'm wondering, my Part 107 technically is expiring at the end of February. Will I need to pay and take the recurrent the old way, or will I be able to do the new training? So was new training introduced in this or no?
It is. There is new training coming out, and again, they kind of alluded to it more, I think, in the Ops Over People rule. This idea of recurrent training, they're going to include in the initial training the operations over people requirements, and then there's going to be kind of a currency thing and a special training for that. So your question is, that's a great question.
Will they be out of date or
I'm
no?
laughing because Vic Moss and Kenji Sugahara were just on yesterday with, he just chatted with me today. Robert, what's his name? I apologize. So many things in my brain right now. But they talked exactly about this. And I think it was even Kenji that said that's exactly what's happening to him, is that his is expiring at the end of February. And then it's just this idea of, do you go ahead and pay for it? And I'm sorry, I forget his answer, but I guarantee if you go on the UAV Law and News Facebook page, which if you're not signed up for that, do that. The Drone Service Providers Alliance and things like that. They're talking about these things. That's a very practical concern. I think you will have to take it unless you want to gap it, I think. But I defer to my operator buddies for that.
Yeah. Well, I know we're coming up on an hour. I want to do just like a very brief recap about the rule and kind of some of what we spoke about. So this is needed for UAs weighing up to 55 pounds, anything greater than 0.55 pounds. It is not needed for home-built unmanned aircraft defined as UA that an individual built solely for education or recreation. It is not required for UA of the United States government and armed forces. Not required for research UA, which is UA designed for the purpose of aeronautical research, or test UA designed to show compliance with regulations. And lastly, indoor UA operations. The remote ID requirements only apply when the UA exits the interior of a building or structure and is operated outside, so indoor ops are not subject to remote ID. And we spoke about the aircraft having to broadcast out the signal. This is not... the requirements are not put on the whole UAS, so not on the entire system itself, which includes the control station and data link. And then finally, we're moving forward with a broadcast based solution, not a network connected based solution. And then we have, I guess, 30 months for every aircraft to comply. So like we talked about, there may be some tweaking in these 30 months. It's a long time in this industry, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how this starts to move forward, what new companies, what new solutions are going to be created to help get all these aircraft on board and get them compliant. That'll be interesting to see if we get some new companies. So, Don, thanks again for being here. I know we went just a little bit long, answered a ton of great questions. Thank you everybody for tuning in and participating. It just makes these episodes really, really fun to be a part of. But any final thoughts, Don? This is as we mentioned, the first podcast of the year. Anything final before we let you go?
Yeah, I would say keep your eyes peeled because more to follow. I mentioned in an earlier article, it's like the Jelly of the Month Club, the gift that's going to keep on giving throughout the year, and I think that's true. Remote ID, Jelly of the Month, because there's so many other policies, advisory circulars, technology, and let's keep our eyes peeled and see what happens with that network piece of it, because that ain't going away. So more to follow, and from the operator standpoint, definitely plug into those operations networks. And if you have things expiring, make sure that you're compliant, right? So if the law enforcement does stop you, you're good to go.
Right.
But no, that's it. It's going to be an interesting year. I think a lot of things are going to happen this year. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
And once again, thanks again, CJ and Mike, for including me.
And how can people get in touch with you if they want to
Oh yeah,
ask any questions?
absolutely. Thanks. So I have my website, www.p3techconsulting.com. If you go to that, every article I've ever written in the last year is up there, previous webinars, podcasts, all kinds of information. And you can also always email me at dawn@p3techconsulting.com. So, that's also linked to my website. So happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, thanks everybody in the chat. Thanks our friends John and Scott for always joining us and contributing. And thank you again, Dawn, for opening up the year with us.
Here, thanks.